I told my agent, I think I might be writing a sequel. And that's it. I sort of committed myself. And she went and told Picador, and that was that. I was like, oh, I've got to do it. I signed a contract.
Welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. My name is Alex Peake-Tomkinson, and I am a literary critic and book journalist. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with the brilliant Jessie Burton. Before we get started, I need to thank the patrons of Edinburgh International Book Festival for supporting this event. And just to explain the structure of the event, such as it will be quite an informal event. It won't be hugely structured and rigid. But Jessie and I will talk for about 45 minutes, and that will include a reading from Jessie's brilliant new novel, The House of Fortune, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. So, I hope you've got some good ones. The audiences at these events tend to put me to shame, so I'm looking forward to seeing if that happens this time. So to introduce Jessie, she is the author of 4 novels.
Yep.
The Miniaturist, The Muse, The Confession, and now the beautiful House of Fortune, which I think you'll agree is beautiful, well, for those of you who've read it, inside and outside. And The House of Fortune is a sequel to The Miniaturist, which came out in 2014 and was a million-copy bestseller. It won the National Book of the Year for the National Book Awards and the Waterstones Book of the Year in 2014. It also became a 2-part series on BBC One starring Anya Taylor-Joy. And I have to say, that is the thing I've been most worried about this afternoon, is getting her name right, because it's so easy to trip over that name. And Romola Garai. But Jessie is also the author of 2 books for children, and they are The Restless Girls and Medusa. The thing that I find most staggering about Jessie's career, however, is that her work has been translated into a whopping 40 different languages, which I find completely mind-blowing.
So do I.
And there is quite a lot to talk about with this lovely, rich new novel, but I think it would be helpful because The Miniaturist came out a while ago, and I imagine many of you read it a few years ago, if Jessie could remind us where The Miniaturist ended and then where The House of Fortune begins.
Sure, I will. Hello. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. So The Miniaturist ended with Nella, the main character, with her life very much reconfigured. I suppose she'd grown up quite a lot through the book, and I don't know whether or not, there may be people here who haven't read The Miniaturist, so can I actually see your hands who's read it? Okay, good, all right then. So Aaron's dead, Johannes has died, her husband, he was executed by the state, and she's, left with Marin and Otto's child, baby Thea, to look after. And really the task is upon her to try and keep the family fortunes afloat. And then The House of Fortune, we meet the characters again 18 years on, and things are not looking rosy. Things are beginning to really fall apart. I sort of feel a bit like the walls of the house are sort of tumbling flat, like the flats of a theatre set, really, and they are literally selling silver and stripping the walls of their paintings to keep up appearances in the burger society of Amsterdam. And Nella is 37 and very preoccupied with marrying off her niece Thea, who is now 18, and Thea has this ferocious spirit of independence and this love of the theatre and this absolute resistance to being told what to do, and Nella can't really handle it. And Nella herself, I don't think, has made peace with what happened to her when she was 18. And I think that's pretty much how I would summarise where we're at.
Brilliant. Do you feel happy reading the next chapter?
Yeah.
Great.
So I thought I'd just start with chapter 2, because I've done chapter 1 quite a lot, read it many times. And the way that I've structured the book is that Nella and Thea alternate. We alternate hearing their inner thoughts. So we start on the morning of Thea's 18th birthday, and we've heard her grumbles about her family and how she wishes to escape them and how they don't understand her. And now we're back with Nella and Otto, Thea's father, sitting in the best room, the salon, after the birthday breakfast. By 11:30, Thea and Cornelia have left in a flurry of scarves and chatter, leaving Nella alone with Otto. Exhausted by the demands of the morning breakfast, the two of them, now dressed, reconvene in the salon to survey the debris of their earlier efforts. The house around them feels quiet and empty, whilst Lucas, who is a cat, full of egg, is fast asleep, a cushion against a cushion. Nella looks around the bare walls, the miserly fire. They haven't bothered with this room for months, being too large to heat, too many hard surfaces. Late in December, the canals froze over, and a sense of the city's pinched withdrawal outside pervades the interior. Going outside is an endurance. Rain sopping wool hoods, the wind a frozen finger. Nella longs for lighter mornings, longer afternoons, to bury her threadbare fur collar in cedar for another year. The choicest firewood will be down to a small pile after this morning's little party, but only the working kitchen and their bedrooms usually see a fire. No point heating up this carcass of a building, too big, too full of echoes because they've thinned the furniture and sold the wall hangings. They've got peat supplies, but the smell is terrible. She yearns for spring. I can't see us doing this for her 19th, she says. Did you see the expression on her face? She liked it, says Otto. We should be displaying ourselves more frequently in here, Nella replies, changing the subject. She stares through the huge front windows, reassuring the citizenry that everything inside is ticking over. Such a performance is becoming wearisome, says Otto. I am well aware. We need to be much more prudent with the household supplies, Nella. Yet another guilder on beeswax candles. It was her birthday, Nella says, avoiding Otto's gaze, unwilling to admit those candles were for herself, to remember when the whole house was once filled with a hint of honey. Do you remember, she says tentatively, for Otto doesn't like to reminisce, how we'd burn oil of rose? Did we? The best the city had, from a merchant who brought it from Damascus. We drenched the place. Nella pauses. I don't regret it. Or maybe I do. She gestures to the walls, because now we are selling our paintings to pay the butcher. Otto sighs. Nella plumps one of the remaining cushions, swirling hidden dust up into the air. She sits, placing the cushion on her lap as if she might dandle it, curling her palms over the chair's carved lion heads, the familiar manes wreathed with leaves of acanthus. Closing her eyes, tracing the wooden muzzles, she shoots an upwards thought to God, but also, why not, to Aphrodite. Let tonight work. Let someone want her. She opens her eyes to find Otto regarding her. His look is disapproving. I know you don't want to go to the ball, she says. You surely cannot tell me you find the company of Clara Sarragan pleasurable. What I find pleasurable is immaterial. As for Clara Sarragan, I will avoid her as much as I can. We are going on behalf of Thea. For her to be stared at, whispered about behind people's hands. All my life I've tried to make sure my child was not a spectacle. They will make her one, and we will have put her there. It might be a good thing people notice her. Thea is beautiful, accomplished. She deserves a chance. A chance at what? Nella doesn't dare say the big word. Marriage. Otto stares into the empty grate, his mouth align. You have no idea what it means to be noticed, like I am noticed, like Thea is noticed, he says. It is not what you think it is. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, but I still want to know the answer. Why this book now? Like, why did you feel like you wanted to return to these characters now?
I don't exactly know why now. I don't think it was, particular thing that happened. I think when I finished The Miniaturist, I sort of felt, well, that's a hermetically sealed novel. It's a story I've told. But I think I was quite naive about what that story meant to me and about what Nella meant to me. And with the kind of quite overwhelming success of The Miniaturist, and talking about it a lot, I did 6 months of press and events and 250 plus events, and I just felt very much like I didn't want to write one book. I wanted to write The Muse and what became The Confession and The Restless Girls and Medusa, and I just felt slightly overpowered by Nella and the book and rejected her slightly, I think. But even as early as 2016, I was writing a couple of scenes, and then I realised as I wrote that was too much too soon. It was just there was sort of a hangover somewhere there that I just had to exorcise. And then I think I realised around 2017, 18 that I was ready and I wasn't finished, or maybe Nella wasn't finished with me. And I think that the universe of The Miniaturist and The House of Fortune do occupy a different place in my mind, the characters and the way I approach it and the way I slip into the stream of the world. And I told my agent, I think I might be writing a sequel. And that's it. I sort of committed myself. And she went and told Picador, and that was that. I was like, oh, I've got to do it. I signed a contract.
And I'm sure they were both thrilled.
I think they were. Yeah, they were quite happy. Yeah. And I just felt, ready to do it, basically.
And then how was it being back in that world?
Yeah, it was really quite effortless, to be honest. I don't mean the actual effort the effort of actually writing the book was tough, as it always is, but occupying that place, that Amsterdam, that house on the Herengracht, very familiar and very much like a child. When you may see an old toy, or you're suddenly, it's quite Proustian. You're back in those inflections of the characters' voices. I felt very at once like I was reunited with them. But I was quite resistant to Nella, and I started with Thea. And it's quite interesting to me. A lot of my novels have this girl who's about 18, on the cusp of adulthood, leaving behind childish things, but still quite innocent. And my agent read it, and she said, I think we need Nella, or I miss Nella. And I kind of knew that I had to find her again, and it was a quite awkward reunion in my mind. If you've been away from a friend and you don't know whether she still likes you, and you're going to be friends again. And but then when I found her, it was quite easy. It was quite simple, really. It was quite a simple experience.
And does she feel quite different to you this time round?
Well, I suppose she's older. She's 37, and I feel she just is frustrated in a way that she wasn't. She had a different kind of fury in the first book. But I think she feels quite stymied, and that she sacrificed quite a lot of her life for others. She is different. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by the idea that you wrote this book basically in lockdown.
Yeah.
So was it comforting to escape into this world?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's quite odd to me that I've written a book about characters who are trapped within four walls, trapped with their family members, nowhere to go, dreaming of another Eden, because a massive part of this book is another space, is Nella's childhood home, which is a site of bad memory for her as she interprets it now as an adult, the layers of time and the layers of memory. But it's also, particularly for Otto, a site of possibility and rebirth and a chance at a new type of life for them. And it was written at the time when a lot of people were dreaming of, I'm going to leave the urban sprawl and set up under an apple tree in a shack and it will be wonderful, kind of thing. It was. I remember when I was writing the book, initial stages of the book, when we were all put into lockdown early 2020. I mean, those years of slightly concertina together. Yeah. And I remember the world mourning this this situation where they were trapped at home and working alone at their desks. And I thought, well, you're all mourning my life. Like, this is what I've been doing for 6 years. I've been in self-isolation every day. And it kind of brought it home to me, actually, how hard obviously no one makes us do it, but how hard the writing life can be when you are alone. And I suppose, yes, the writing gave me a point of focus, but I do remember for 3 weeks I didn't write. I just couldn't do it. And then I got on with it because I literally had to, because I had a deadline and I was pregnant at the time. So there's a lot in the book about sort of housing. I was housing a baby and I was housed myself. And my parents also were living with me because our family home, my childhood home, went up in flames and they were, homeless for a year. And my mum just kept saying, this is the house of misfortune.
Oh, no.
They're fine. And, my father found the blaze, 78, got down the stairs to call the fire brigade. Anyway, That's another story. But it was all a lot of that. And it was very odd to me that during, firstly, the trimesters of a pregnancy matched up with the writing of the book. So, and I finished the book August the 16th, and 2 weeks later gave birth. And I knew I had to finish it before. I did that because I was unleashing chaos. And I needed that containment and that control to finish the book. But I also feel, there were decisions I make on Nella's behalf within the book about her family life, that it was very interesting to me, as I've said earlier, how aligned I feel to Nella. These two paths, me taking one and her potentially taking another. So, it was a very powerful experience writing this book. And I don't say that lightly.
And I guess it's kind of quite hard for you to be detached about this, but did the experience of writing whilst being pregnant, did that feel different? I mean, maybe partly, as you say, because it gave you a really firm deadline.
I'm quite strict with deadlines anyway, but this one was particularly strict. Physically, I found it very challenging, the first few weeks.
I'm not surprised.
I can't really remember it, to be honest. I just remember feeling very sick and thinking this is really hard. But then I feel, I think of all the women who don't get to take breaks under their desks on the floor in offices. I'm self-employed, so I got to do that. But the poor child, I mean, he heard this story more than any child should ever have heard a novel. But yes, honestly, Alex, I can't quite remember clearly, so I don't want to say that it was very, very different. But in the main, as I got, more pregnant, I did focus very much on the book and less perhaps on the baby in my body and in the book, and the baby in my mind and the baby in my stomach or my womb was a bit different.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
Had to get this one sorted before I tried a different kind of motherhood.
I now just really want us to get to talk about babies, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
It's a subject, yes. Well, we'll do another event and make that the headline, and then
No, absolutely. But I'm really fascinated by the way that you talk about your characters. And you talk about Nella as though they've kind of got a life of their own, and it's something that I found with lots of novelists, that occasionally their characters, which they have invented, do things they don't want them to. Has that happened? Where?
It's a very interesting question, because I think there are some novelists who demur and say, oh, they had a life of their own and they ran. And it's like, well, you are the arch puppeteer here.
Yeah.
And if you really don't want someone to do something. But at the same time, I'm sympathetic to that idea that there is somebody that you sort of create and you invest so much time in. It's a bit like, I suppose, like a Frankenstein's monster, that they then don't quite turn on you, but they become so real to you that they perhaps do something that surprises you, or perhaps in conversations with your editor, they encourage you in a certain direction and you think, oh yeah, actually X or Y could do that. And I remember when I was an actress, I was always very interested in actors who, and there are not many of them, who you genuinely don't know what they're going to do next, even if it's a character like a play like Hamlet or something. And I quite like that in my characters, and this sense of not quite fully knowing them. In a way that I want the reader to complete that understanding on their subjective terms. I very much controlled everything in this book. I wouldn't say any of them did anything that I was surprised by.
I'm thrilled to finally hear a novelist owning a book. And I'm also really interested that you worked, I think this time around you worked with a sensitivity reader.
Yes.
Like, how was that?
So Helen Gould, her name was, she came on board very late, last draft, I think. And she is of dual heritage, and Thea is as well. And we thought it would be an interesting and good idea. And I really relished it, because I think there's a perception that someone comes along with a clipboard and some boxes, and if you don't do X or Y, your book is sort of sent back and you have to make it pleasing to the greater majority. Actually, what it did do was I pushed back on some things, because I maintained the character would think that. But there are other things that she pointed out to me. For example, Thea's hair. I had Thea turn up at the house and get ready in 10 minutes for a ball, and Helen was like, what, in January mists in Amsterdam with hair like that, come on. And it gave me an opportunity to think, okay, well, Cornelia, the maid, is besotted with her child, her nursling. And I thought, how about if Cornelia has spent free time working out beeswax pomades to make the curls better, and it's actually Thea who's fed up with the attention and things like that. So I found it very helpful, and ultimately it was my say to accept or reject any of the advices. So yeah, I really enjoy collaborating, and with novels you don't get to do that much, so I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
A different novelist would probably be like, oh, I'm right. But, yeah.
And I'm interested that you said that you felt able to push back, because I feel, and it's kind of reflecting what you were saying earlier about how comfortable you felt in this setting, like the novel feels really confident. It feels like you really know this kind of scene, you really know the characters. But to get to that point, did you feel that you had to do, because it's a historical novel, did you feel like you had to do a lot of research?
Well, I was lucky in the sense that I had all the things left over that I'd researched for The Miniaturist. And although we've moved 18 years on, and obviously prices have probably risen, and I think The Miniaturist is more enmeshed or immersed in historical detail in terms of costs and foodstuffs, and this feels slightly more psychological or emotional. I mean, they both are, but I always remember Bernard Cornwell saying, the story is king. So even if it is a setting that's historical, these characters are the most modern people alive to themselves. They are cutting edge, They've got the best wooden ships and, the strongest sails and the most wide variety of spices on their plates. And I suppose I took that and I used that as my ballast, I suppose, to not get bogged down in, history lessons. People don't live in history lessons when they're living. So, I didn't have to do too much more. And in fact, there was a window of time in July 2020. I'd written a draft, and I went back to Amsterdam with a checklist of places that I needed to see. And as I got there, I realised I didn't need to have gone there at all. It was all in my head, and I knew it. I don't mean that arrogantly, but the impressionistic Amsterdam I had created was there, and I didn't need to go. I mean, it was lovely to be there.
Still fun, yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting as well from a point of view of the cultural archive had really changed in terms of how they presented their archives with black Amsterdammers, because I came up against a bit of flack with the Miniaturist for being too politically correct.
Oh.
Not
in which quarter?
Well, it was Private Eye.
Oh, okay.
And they said,
I mean, they're going to find fault
I know.
somewhere,
It wasn't exactly a general criticism, but of course it pricked my annoyance. Because they say, it's so politically correct. She's got a black man and a gay man and a woman with proto-feminist ideals and all of this. And actually, when I went back to Amsterdam, the National Archives had done a real deep dive, and they'd found a man called Christian Schwartz, who was black, who had inherited a house on the Herengracht from his former master, and I felt very vindicated indeed. So anyway, that's an aside, but yeah, it's a funny one because it is deemed historical fiction, but I I sometimes wonder whether I even use Amsterdam and the setting as a sort of a backdrop, really, for something else, for another story, for a different story. A story about families, a story about trying to find your place.
Yeah, absolutely. I was interested, you were kind of saying earlier that, one of the difficulties that all novelists face is that you have to... I mean, I think part of the reason that people write novels is to be more in the world, to be more with other people, and yet to do it, like, you kind of have to be on your own.
To withdraw from the world.
And that you said you enjoyed collaboration. How did you feel, therefore, about your work being adapted for TV? Like, was that fun? Was that...
Well, I was excited about that. I didn't actually have much to do with it, though. I didn't have any say on the casting, although I was extremely happy with it, to get particularly Anya on the cusp, because it was before the Queen's Gambit and her intergalactic launch into the world. And she was wonderful. She was so hardworking.
An amazing face,
incredible face. Yeah. And she's really tall as well. So you sort of meet her and you think, how are you even real? How? And she's lovely. And the crew really like her. And I've got a friend who's been on another job with her, and that crew really liked her. That's always a good sign. She was so professional. Anyway, so I didn't... It was obviously exciting, because a lot of books get optioned and nothing happens because of timings, cast, money. It's just a miracle if it ever gets made. So that was exciting, but I actually didn't have any authorial input at all.
And did you feel quite relaxed about that? Did you feel... Because it's a bit... People say it's a bit like writing a book. It's a bit like having a child. You kind of have to, like, let it go.
Yeah, I mean, by that point, it was 3 years on. I mean, I was a bit over it. Like, I was like...
You say that, and yet you came back.
I know, I did. But I mean, the Miniaturist, and I wanted them to just do whatever they wanted to do with it.
Okay.
That would have excited me. It was actually quite a loyal adaptation. If they'd wanted to chop and change it and make it a bit... But it was BBC One rather than 2, so it was always going to be quite
straight.
Flagship, Christmas, which is fine. It was, and the acting was such good casting. But, yeah, I think I'd like to maybe have more involvement with other of my books, but they also sometimes advise against it, because you sometimes can't let go, and you do too plodding an adaptation because you just think it has to go in this order. So as long as there's someone involved who's so impressive, or... I think, go and do whatever you want.
Yeah, and can kind of give it a different life.
Yeah, because the novel remains, whatever happens.
Yeah.
But I do know that, Du Maurier and Hitchcock, she hated all of what Hitchcock did.
Really?
Yeah. I remember that one.
One more question about the TV thing, because I am interested in this. What was it like seeing the product of your imagination, like things that only you have visualised initially?
Extremely familiar. It was really odd. I was like... And I think it's partly because it's such a received idea. It's very Vermeer-esque, The same lighting director on Wolf Hall was the lighting director on The Miniaturist. So he was a big advocate of natural light and candles. So the use of light in it was so superior, and it just reminded me of paintings that I'd seen. So it was oddly familiar. And... Romola Gary as Marin. It was just perfect. And I think it's both the novels are quite theatrical in the sense, there's a set, the house is a set, and people come on and speak lines, and there's a sort of element of, I think, I don't know, but sometimes when I reread it, because I hadn't opened The Miniaturist for 6 years, and I had a reread, I had to, in order to write this one, so I dared to read it. And I thought, it has a theatricality to it that lends itself, I think, to performance. And a lot of actresses read the first one and really wanted to play all the parts. So that was good.
Well, that's flattering.
Very, yes. Yeah. Some quite strange choices approached me. I was like, I don't think you're quite right. It's the kind of thing I would have done as well. Just write to the author, I am Marin.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I am interested in how you write, and particularly... I know lots of authors don't read books similar to theirs when they're writing, because they don't want to kind of become contaminated or influenced. Are you quite strict about that, or...?
I'm just trying to remember what I read when I wrote The House of Fortune. I just try and read superior writers
and hope that you're contaminated.
Osmotic process, I get better. Yeah, I'm not too precious about that. I don't, but I didn't read any books set in that period, but not because I was like, I cannot. It was just I wasn't reading those books at the time. I can't remember what I was reading, but they're often quite different, probably starker, maybe more contemporary.
Okay.
Yeah, but I definitely wouldn't stop reading when I'm writing.
So you wouldn't be like, if Hilary Mantel published a new novel, you wouldn't be like, no.
Oh, I'd be the first to read it. No, 100%. 100%. Because I know as well that I would never be able to do what she does. I do remember I read The Department of Speculation when I was writing The Muse by Jenny Offill, which is an amazing short book. It's so spectacular. And I cut the Muse, I just broke it into paragraphs thinking, well, this is what I'm going to do. It was such a disaster. So I learnt from that, let people be good at what they're good at and enjoy your own talents in a different way. And everyone's happy.
And you've been really honest about how much you graft at writing.
Have I?
Yeah, I think so. I think that...
when and where have I... Have I been selling myself as the workers' writer?
But no, I think that you've kind of said that the first draft is hard, that you're kind of grinding it out.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Some writers love the first draft. I hate it. I just think this is... Because you have this kind of platonic ideal, this perfect novel in your mind, and then the act of getting it down is so embarrassing and hard, and you turn up every day and face your shortcomings. And I think that's why so many people feel so enthusiastic to do it, have a go, and realise it's really thankless. And you have to be very bloody-minded, very strong. I suppose you have to have quite a strong ego to think, well, I'm going to do something that I think other people will enjoy. Or maybe you do it for yourself. There are myriad reasons, of course, for writing. And it's really only when you've got your first draft down, I feel, I can start to write this book, because I can see what I was trying to do. And it's very difficult because I think one experiences reading atemporally and, all at once, whereas unfortunately we live in real time, the seconds and the minutes and the hours of a day, which you plod through, and you cannot write the whole book at once. You can write it in threads and layers or patches. And that act of putting it all together is tremendously difficult. And this one was, I jettisoned 300,000 words of it to get it right. I wrote it twice, threw it away twice, and started again.
From scratch?
From scratch.
Wow.
Okay. Didn't even use any of the text from the first two books.
Okay.
I know. Yeah. I really don't want to do that again. I say to myself, I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to make a plan. And I get Post-it notes out, and I just sit and I stare at the notes, and they're completely blank. And I've seen other writers do it, and they've got plots. And I remember, again, going back to The Muse, I remember finishing The Muse, feeling really happy with it, genuinely, and then finding this A3 page, which just had Adele, Marjorie, just the two names of these women and nothing else. So it's just a bloody nightmare. And I don't know. But I remember, Sarah Moss, who wrote Ghost Wall and Summer Water. She's an incredible writer. She does that. She chucks the books away. And I remember reading that and just thinking, well, I will never do that because that's crazy. And I handed my editor the second draft that I felt was presentable of The House of Fortune to my editor in November of 2020. Yes. And as soon as I'd done it, I just knew it was wrong. And it's that act, I think, of that sharing moment where you're humbled by how terrible it is, and you think, oh my God, I cannot believe she's actually going to have to read this. And I wrote her this sort of 2,000-word email thing. Oh, obviously, this has changed. And then I went back, I found out I was pregnant New Year's Eve, and then I wrote the whole thing in 12 weeks.
Oh my God.
Yeah, knew exactly what I had to do, but had to go through that 23 months of writing before I got the 3 months of the right book.
Wow.
Don't recommend it.
And I'm interested, so is your editor your first reader, or presumably your agent, or how does...
Usually my agent gets panic, sends, I'll send her just like, this is terrible, I don't know what I'm doing, and we have conversations, and it's always, and that's why I said I enjoyed the sensitivity reader, because it's through those conversations your own point of view gets solidified and strengthened. And sometimes when you're alone with your thoughts and your attempts, you don't have anything to sound against. And I think that perhaps comes from my acting background, where, again, it has to succeed by being collaborative and by sharing and by listening and ceding the floor. So, yeah, that's how I work. But I don't share it with friends and family, really. They end up reading it when it's a finished book.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. No, I keep it quite church and state, quite separate. Yeah. I think that's quite wise.
Yeah, it probably is.
If someone's like, why did you do that? And it's like your partner.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Lots of rows might ensue, I don't know.
Yeah, hold them responsible.
Yeah.
We have got some questions from the online audience. So
in the ether?
Yeah, so I think I might start with those before we open it up to the floor. So... Oh, how interesting. So Patricia says,
go on.
Not having read the new book yet, I wonder why Nella had not remarried.
Well, Patricia, where do I start? I think one of the reasons she hasn't got married is because she has thrown herself into her role as Thea's mother, her guardian, and she also hasn't found anyone who can lure her back into the married state. I mean, she was pretty burned the first time. It didn't go that well. And there's a passage in the book where she really envies the wealthier widows of Amsterdam with their pearls as large as hen's eggs. And, there was a particular role for widowed women that was quite envy-making, because it was... You didn't have to sort of perform those feminine roles of wife and mother, but you enjoyed the inheritance from your dead husband, and you could sort of do what you liked, and you had a bit of a status often from if your husband was an ex-merchant or something. So many women chose not to do it, because there was obviously a lot of dangers as well with the marriage bed and babies and that sort of thing. But she also just hasn't found anyone, and she hasn't dealt with a lot of her past in order to... It sounds a bit modern, therapeutic. In order to move on, I don't know if I really believe in closure, but I don't think she's... I've read this amazing thing at the back of a book that I've read recently by Rachel Cusk. No, The Afterword by Rachel Cusk, and she says, life can never be undone. It can be re-examined, but it cannot be undone. And I think that's what Nella is realising, and that's why she hasn't married yet. She hasn't examined herself, and that's what this book is.
Excellent. And Declan wants to know, what attracted you to write about this historical period in the Netherlands?
Well, it all stems from being there in 2009, so I've been 13 years now with this this world. And I was in the Rijksmuseum, and I saw the cabinet house that's kind of one of the main features in the Miniaturist, and it was so beautiful. It was an exact replica of Petronella Ortmann's real house, and she hired 800 plus craftspeople to furnish it over 19 years at a cost the same as a full-blown townhouse, and she had ceramics shipped from Japan and miniature makers making paintings and silverware. And I just thought, what a strange thing to do. Beds you can't sleep in and food you can't eat. What kind of psychology is that? And also how it so much reflected that period of Dutch Golden Age power, of the opulence and the confidence, and yet underlying it a real Calvinistic neurosis that the tsunami was going to come, because the whole empire was built on water. Even the land, Amsterdam, was shored up from the marshes. So I just thought it was I didn't have any grand ambitions for a novel, but I just thought it's a really cool story.
Yeah, for sure. Do we have any questions from the audience? The lady at the back.
I just wondered, where did you get the inspiration for the pineapples in House of Fortune, and if there was any relation to the sort of the theme of the sugar throughout the Miniaturist?
Yes. So a big feature of the House of Fortune is the cultivation in the Northern Hemisphere of pineapples and other tropical fruits. hand on heart, I can't quite remember at what point I thought pineapples is going to be part of this book. But I think because I was very interested in the colonial legacy of Suriname, the Dutch-owned colony country in the top of South America, and, you know, the kind of unpicked history there of slavery and proxy wealth. And I think I felt that particularly the pineapple as a symbol of luxury, as a distanced symbol of power and oppression, it was quite an interesting one to use. And also, it was also quite a useful one in terms of Otto's character and his relationship to this fruit that, you know, was in abundance where he grew up, but now is this commodity that he could engage with on his terms, but also that it is absolutely in conversation, I suppose, with the story of sugar in the first book. And these two novels definitely mirror each other. And at the time, the Dutch were the kind of arch engineers of horticulture and tropical fruit growth. There were a lot of estates around, and when William and Mary became monarchs in England, they brought with them all their experts, and that's how we started in this isle. I just realised we're in Scotland. I only got here about 45 minutes ago. But the Scottish had a lot as well. So yeah, and it's not fun, but it's a pleasurable shape, and it's for some people it's frivolous, and other people it's very serious in the book.
There are some more online questions, but there are a few hands in the audience.
Hi there.
Hi.
Your books do something that I think many good authors do, that when you finish it, there's a sense of grief because the story is finished, and the next book that you read is never quite the same. What book can you think of that's done that to you?
Oh, goodness. Ooh. Firstly, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. Book hangovers. I'm trying to there are a couple of books that do that to me. And the first is What I Loved by Siri Hustvedt, which is one of my all-time favourite novels. And another one, it's a very successful, well-known, but it's Wolf Hall. I think when I first read that, I realised what you could do with historical fiction and how you could be more flexible, more muscular with someone who's supposed to be fusty and old and, you know, in the past. And whenever I've had difficult periods in my life, Wolf Hall gets off the shelf and I just vanish into it. And I think I have a double grief with that book because not only is it finished, I also know I'll never be able to write like that. So it's like this, but it's a kind of like enjoyable pain. Yeah.
Well, there's some more hands. I feel like I saw some more hands. If not, I've got some online questions. I'm just conscious of giving people who are actually in the room time.
Thank you. I was wondering, you also write for children,
Mm-hmm.
and you describe writing for adults as quite a painful exercise. That's a completely different and very light exercise? Or?
Yes, I'm not the greatest advocate, am I, for writing. Sometimes I will say for adults it can be extremely enjoyable when you get it right. Yes, I do. Writing The Restless Girls, which was a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses and Medusa, but particularly I think The Restless Girls, because it's an offering of joy and dancing and freedom. And I really enjoyed writing it. Yeah. And also, it's 23,000 words long, so these are about 100,000 each. So there's that pleasure too, without wishing to be too prosaic. And I think particularly with those two books, The Restless Girls and Medusa, the honour of having them illustrated so beautifully, so powerfully, was just, I can't really describe, it's definitely a highlight of my career. But you do still feel the same, as happy-making as it is, you do definitely feel a sense of responsibility because children are arguably more demanding audiences and will just, turn away if you haven't engaged their attention or taken them seriously. So it's quite a hard balance, but yes, it is. I kind of approach it the same way in terms of, taking it seriously, but I suppose on a supra level, the experience is more enjoyable.
And this might be a good juncture to answer Amy's question. How much of an input do you have in your book covers, and how important are they to you?
They're very important to me. Again, because I love illustration and visual arts. I think partly because I can't do it myself, so it's just this mystification to me that how anyone could do this. Yes, I have had quite a lot of consultation actually with my covers. I feel very lucky for that. But not in I'm a firm believer as well in letting people do their jobs, letting people be good at what they're good at. But yes, I'm very lucky that, people send me early doors ideas and I think, well, I'm not sure about that. And can we think about X or Y? Okay. Yeah. But with the children's books, I had no say. Those artists were delivering their work and that was that, which is fine, But the cover's a bit different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Bridget has asked, will there be another book in this world?
I mean, I said there would never be another one 8 years ago. I feel like I can't say that now. I think, I don't know. I feel like I'm done again for a while, and then maybe it feels that there is another one there. I can't leave it where I've left it. I mean, I can, but I can't.
Yeah.
So, I think so.
I mean, I want to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I have a few ideas. But I also know that there are about 3 or 4 books I want to write before I write that one.
Okay, so you're going to be busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Were there any more questions?
There's one.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to take the conversation back to babies, if that's okay.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Sort of mothers or the lack of them is really critical in so many of your stories. I'm just wondering how you feel that becoming a mother... I also became a mother in 2020. How you feel that will change your future and your writing and finding time to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
Rather than anything else.
Yeah, it's funny. I suppose the more books you write, the more opportunity you have to be analysed as a person and what's preoccupied you. And I have 100% been preoccupied with what it means to be a mother. Even my early stories as a child would often end with a pregnancy announcement. I was obsessed. I think it's because I'm an only child. And I think I wanted a sibling. And so in the stories I wrote, Mum and Dad would announce a baby was on the way. It never happened, but probably for the best. But, yeah, I don't know. It's a funny one. When I think about The Confession, which is my 3rd novel, I think I wrote out a lot of my own personal anxieties about becoming a mother or the decision to do it. And I think regardless of whether you're an artist or not, any person having a child will fear the reapportioning of time and energy. And I was very nervous, and I was pleasantly surprised when it happened. I was also very lucky because I finished the book, and so I was done. There was no obligation for many, many months, and he's nearly a year old, and now I'm back on this, doing bits and bobs. I honestly can't say how it's going to be because I haven't tried it yet. I'm a bit nervous about it, to be honest. I hope that, I think back to when I wrote my first novel, and I was doing that in a very patchwork way on the hoof, on commuter trains, in dribs and drabs, and it still worked. I don't think one has to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day to do meaningful work. In fact, I think that can be quite counterproductive. And I think the more thing is sleep and getting some energy. So we'll see. I'll try and get some sleep, and then I'll try and write a book. But at the moment, I haven't. And also thinking, should I put him in the books like Christopher Robin? I thought, no, I think that's a bit dodgy. I think he might hate me for that. I do have an idea for a board book.
Okay.
But that's the only inspiration I've had. Terrible. But it's just been so... I think as well, I had the baby quite late in my life. I was 39. Late in, the bloody window thing.
Yeah.
And I'm quite glad of it, actually, because I didn't feel like I had anything to prove career-wise. I had written those books and enjoyed that, and it was time to try and do something else. I feel quite lucky for that. And also, my mother had me when she was 38, about to turn 39. So I never even considered it, you know. I would have had him at 45, probably. Maybe not. On my knees, I was like, oh, God, I get it why people do it when they're 20. But yeah, I haven't worked it out yet. It's still all, as you must know too, it's just, woof, everything just throws up in the air and then you just watch it land in different places and you just survey it and just
I
take
feel
it.
like he might give you some feedback on the board book idea, though, soon. I mean, not just...
Yeah,
but,
well, we'll see, yeah. But board, I mean, it's great. You write like 15 words or something. I'm terrible. I'm so mercenary now. I'm like, I'll only do it for like 15 words. Yeah. But yeah, it's a funny one because as well, I think a lot of writers feel this, you know, the self-consciousness of your family reading things and the power of a child reading your work. I mean, he probably won't be so mortified, he'll be embarrassed, but oh my God, even though it's probably going to like pay for his dinners. Yeah. Anyway.
Brilliant. Were there any more questions?
No? There's one.
No.
It's like I'm spotting things in the woods.
There's one. Safari.
Yeah, I've seen it.
I haven't finished the book yet, but on the basis of the first mini-series, do you think there will be one with the House of Fortune?
Well, that would be lovely. There's been no sort of noises that way. And as I said earlier, I'm very hesitant until I'm sitting in a screening room. I don't think... One thing, obviously, I had a fantasy of was the cast would be reunited, but Anya is too young and too famous now, I think, to do a BBC One series. Well, you never know. But it would be lovely. But as of yet, there's no plans. The one thing I'd really like to work on is a stage musical of the Restless Girls. I think that would be...
A musical?
Yeah, that's kind of in the bubbling, because it would be good with the sort of jazz age stuff.
Yeah.
But the Miniaturist rights are now available again, in case any TV producers maybe in the audience. But I was thinking, and again, like I said earlier, there's part of me that would quite like to try it myself to see if I could do it, because then I don't have to wait. Because that was a bit like with the acting, you have to wait for someone else's permission, and the starting writing again was so liberating because I didn't. So maybe I'll write a terrible screenplay and everyone will go, oh, that's really great, Jess. We'll shelve that. We'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
The book group that I'm in, we thought this was just a superb book, you know, your first one. I just wanted to ask you about, you know, Johannes and his ending. I don't think it's a spoiler for anyone because you did mention, you know, early in the interview that, you know, he meets with execution. Can I just check how you felt about, you know, ending his life that way? And, you know, did your research look at, did that ending happen to people
a lot
at that
of the
time in Holland?
Yeah, so his execution by having a millstone being put around his neck and pushed into the sea was the kind of ritualistic way that the state handled gay men, because it was viewed as a sort of, well, it was the waters kind of claiming him. It was a punishment. And I think the civic preoccupation with homosexuality, it was, you know, religious, but I think as well it was about what the family represented to the Netherlandish state. It was so important. It was like the microcosm of the state. So if you weren't procreating, as they saw it, you were holding back the power of the state, and you had to be punished by the very waters that brought the trade in. And I remember very early on in my research of the period reading that and thinking, I think that's what's going to not have to happen, but will happen. And that chapter where he is murdered, I didn't really edit. I edited the rest of it, but it just came out quite cleanly. Yeah, very sad, because I remember when I did the Spanish press for that book. There was sometimes they're much more psychoanalytical, and he asked me, this journalist, you've created this kind of strangely sexless but really happy marriage. What's that about? Oh, God.
Yeah.
This kind of father figure that is very safe for Nella, as much as she wants to have a sexual life. That's what I was alluding to earlier, that strange thing of being read and, you know.
Yeah.
But and I think that's why in this book, in The House of Fortune, I'm trying to move Nella on into an adult world.
Okay. There's 2 more online questions. So Lisa wants to know, she says, I think it's so clever that the miniaturist is always there.
Oh, yeah, we haven't talked about her, have we?
Fleeting through the threads of the book, but we still don't know much about her. I'd love to know what else you, as the author, know about the miniaturist. Come on, tell us.
Tell us. Well, I mean...
Well, look at your face light up.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it's a tricky one to answer because she obviously is very elusive as a character, in a sort of flesh and bones way. But she is so important to the engine of the novel, the completion of the novel, and the characters' sense of themselves and where they're going in the novel. And she's many things. She is a commentary on faith and also self-belief and self-creation, the dangers of susceptibility and the dangers of, as much as imagination can be liberating, it can be very, for many people, overpowering and debilitating. She's a commentary on the power of creativity. She's many things, and so I suppose by keeping her at arm's length, she can remain all those things, and it's up to the reader to decide. And it's very interesting because a lot of people always, not a lot of people, but some people, feel a bit like, well, who is she? And I want to know. And other people are very happy to let her sort of float liminally around. But there is a moment in this book where it's almost like Nella faces her down towards the end, and she has to make a decision to go with her or not. And I won't give it away for people who haven't finished it, but Thea is very different in the sense that she doesn't imbue the miniatures and the miniaturist with as much meaning as her aunt does. Because I think Thea's had actually a more grounded life, a tougher life out in the streets of Amsterdam, being singled out. Yeah. But even when I wrote The Miniaturist, the editors were sort of saying, can you kind of bring her forward a bit?
And they did slightly in the TV, didn't they?
Yeah, like the actress spoke her story, and which I wouldn't have done myself were I putting it on BBC Two.
So we are about to overrun, but I think we're probably okay just to answer this one last question from Bavika. Oh, and to say that after this, Jessie will be signing in the book signing tent. So maybe if you have a question that you haven't been able to ask in this session, she'll be over there. So Bavika has said, I absolutely loved The Confession. It's gorgeous. I wanted to ask if you enjoyed writing the dual timelines, contemporary and historical, in that book, or do you prefer to completely immerse yourself in a historical setting like The Miniaturist or The House of Fortune?
I really enjoyed writing the contemporary settings. I mean, 2017, 18 and the 1980s. Yeah, it was not a breath of fresh air, but I think books present themselves to you eventually, or some sort of story, some sort of urge, some sort of compulsion. And I felt very much like I wanted to tell Rose's story. And I really enjoyed setting a book in the contemporary setting, and I definitely want to do that again.
Great. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Alex, and thank you, everyone.